Silver light explodes from Sarah's skin as she stands before the assembled pack of Silverpine. Ancient power floods through her veins, turning her eyes into blazing stars of moonfire. The entire council drops to their knees, terror and reverence warring on their faces. Alpha Magnus Stone himself has gone pale, his authority crumbling like ash before this divine display. And there, cowering at the edge of the crowd, is Thorn Blackwood, the man who rejected her. The man who called her cursed, defective, unworthy of standing beside any wolf, let alone an alpha. Sarah's voice echoes with supernatural authority as she speaks, each word carrying the weight of the goddess herself. That's what you rejected. That's what you call cursed. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back to where this story truly begins. Back to the moment when Sarah Ashford's world shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. The rejection came without warning, brutal in its cold efficiency. One moment Sarah was standing in the ceremonial hall of the Silverpine Pack, her hand clasped in Thorn Blackwood's larger one, listening to Elder Morrison begin the sacred mating ceremony, words that would bind them together for life. The autumn sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden light across the assembled pack members. Everything smelled of pine and anticipation and the particular sweetness that came with Omega happiness. Sarah's heart had been full. Despite everything, despite the whispers that had followed her since she presented as Omega at 16, despite the pitying looks from wolves who couldn't understand why she'd never shifted into wolf form despite 6 years of being treated like something broken and incomplete, she'd believed that Thorn saw past all of that. He'd chosen her. He'd declared before witnesses that he felt the mate bond with her. He'd promised her a future. The next moment, Thorn was stepping back, releasing her hand like it had burned him. His face contorted with an expression Sarah had never seen before, disgust mixing with something that looked almost like triumph. When he looked at her, it was like she was something he'd scraped off his boot after walking through the training grounds. The ceremonial hall went silent. 200 wolves held their collective breath. I, Thorn Blackwood, hereby reject you, Sarah Ashford, as my mate. His voice carried through the hall, amplified by the acoustic design meant to let every pack member witness sacred ceremonies. Each word struck Sarah like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs and sending ice flooding through her veins. But he wasn't finished. You are adequate enough in appearance, I suppose. His eyes raked over her dismissively, and several pack members shifted uncomfortably. But you're weak. Your Omega nature is too strong, too submissive for a wolf of my standing. I need a mate who can stand beside me with strength, not cower behind me expecting protection. Sarah stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of test, some Omega trial she didn't understand. Thorn loved her. He'd said so, hadn't he? He'd courted her for 3 months, brought her wildflowers from the mountain meadows, walked with her under the full moon, kissed her with what she'd believed was genuine affection. Your inability to shift, Thorn continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone, like he was explaining something obvious to a child, is a genetic defect, a curse upon our bloodline that I cannot in good conscience pass to my children. The pack healers have examined you countless times and declared you fundamentally broken. I was willing to overlook this, willing to give you a chance despite your obvious inadequacy. He paused, letting his words sink in, letting the entire pack absorb the magnitude of her humiliation. But the mate bond I claimed to feel was clearly a mistake on my part. Wishful thinking, perhaps, or temporary madness brought on by your Omega pheromones during your heat cycles. Now that I've had time to think clearly, to consult with wolves whose judgment I trust, I realize I cannot bind myself to damaged goods. Damaged goods. The words echoed in the sudden silence. Sarah felt something crack deep inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with the mate bond and everything to do with her sense of self-worth that she'd fought so hard to maintain over the years. Around her, the assembled pack members shifted and whispered. Some looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Others watched with barely concealed satisfaction. Sarah had never been popular in Silverpine, had always been too quiet, too gentle, too focused on helping the elderly and teaching the pups rather than engaging in the constant power struggles that consumed the pack's social hierarchy. But this public destruction of her reputation and her future, this was beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Sarah wanted to protest, wanted to rage against the injustice of it all, wanted to demand answers, to ask how he could do this after everything they'd shared, after all his promises and pretty words. But her Omega nature, that core part of herself that Thorn had just weaponized against her, wouldn't let her make a scene, wouldn't let her fight back in front of the pack, wouldn't let her do anything except stand there and take it with as much dignity as she could scrape together from the wreckage of her shattered dreams. She lifted her chin, straightened her spine, met Thorn's eyes with all the strength she possessed. She would not give them the satisfaction of tears. Not here. Not now. Alpha Magnus Stone stepped forward from his position at the head of the hall. He was a large man, 45 years old, with gray-streaked brown hair and hazel eyes that had always reminded Sarah of Riverstones, cold and smooth and unyielding. He'd led the Silver Pine Pack for 20 years, with an iron fist wrapped in political calculation. Sarah Ashford. His voice was formal, businesslike, as if he were discussing crop yields rather than destroying a young woman's life. In light of this rejection and your continued inability to contribute to the pack's strength through shifting hunting or bearing viable offspring, you are hereby banished from Silver Pine territory. The words fell like an executioner's axe. Banished. Sarah's knees went weak, but she locked them, refusing to fall. Banishment was a death sentence for a lone Omega. Everyone knew that. Without pack protection, without territory to call home, without the communal resources that kept wolves alive through harsh Montana winters, she would die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. You have 1 hour to gather your belongings. Magnus continued, consulting his watch, like this was just another administrative task on his daily schedule. If you are found within our borders after that time, you will be killed as a rogue threat to pack security. Do you understand? Sarah's voice came out steady despite the trembling that had seized her entire body. I understand, Alpha. She would not beg, would not plead for mercy or understanding or even basic compassion. These wolves had made their decision. They'd chosen to cast her out rather than deal with the inconvenience of an Omega who couldn't shift. An Omega who'd only ever tried to help, to heal, to make their lives better in whatever small way she could. Then you are dismissed. Magnus waved his hand in a gesture of finality. Pack members, return to your duties. This matter is concluded. The crowd began to disperse, conversations starting up like they'd just witnessed something mildly interesting rather than the complete destruction of someone's existence. A few wolves cast sympathetic glances in Sarah's direction, but none of them stepped forward to object. None of them offered support. None of them risked their own standing to defend her. Sarah stood alone in the center of the ceremonial hall as 200 wolves flowed around her like water around a stone, already forgetting she'd ever been one of them. Her former friends, the pack members she'd grown up with, the wolves she'd helped and healed over the years, the children she'd taught to read and write, the elderly she'd brought food to during their weakest months, all of them turned their backs and walked away without a word. Only when the hall was empty did Sarah allow herself to move. Her legs felt disconnected from her body as she walked toward the door, each step an exercise in maintaining control when everything inside her screamed to collapse. The walk from the ceremonial hall to the Omega quarters felt like miles instead of minutes. Every shadow seemed to whisper her failures. Every window reflected a woman she no longer recognized. Damaged goods, defective, cursed, unworthy. The words circled in her mind like vultures. Sarah's room in the Omega quarters was small, barely 10 feet square, with a narrow bed, a battered dresser, and a single window that looked out over the forest. She'd lived here since she presented as Omega at 16, and in all that time she'd accumulated almost nothing of value. A few changes of clothes, mostly hand-me-downs, from other Omegas who'd moved up in pack status or died. A worn quilt her mother had made before dying of pneumonia when Sarah was 12. A small wooden box containing the few personal items she owned, letters from her father before he'd been killed in a territorial dispute with a neighboring pack, a riverstone she'd found that reminded her of better days, a pressed flower from her first walk with Thorn. She stared at that flower for a long moment before crushing it in her fist. 1 hour. She had 1 hour to pack up 22 years of life and leave the only home she'd ever known. Sarah pulled her worn backpack from under the bed and began throwing clothes into it with shaking hands. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, undergarments, socks. Her winter cloak, thin and patched, but better than nothing. The quilt went in, last compressed down as much as possible. The wooden box of personal items seemed pointless now, but she couldn't bring herself to leave her father's letters behind. A knock on the door made her freeze, hope flaring bright and painful in her chest. Maybe someone had come to help. Maybe someone had realized this was wrong and come to offer supplies or money, or at least a kind word. The door opened to reveal Thorn Blackwood. He looked uncomfortable, almost guilty, but there was steel beneath his expression that told Sarah he hadn't come to apologize or take back his rejection. He'd come to justify himself, to make himself feel better about what he'd done. I wanted to explain, he started, but Sarah cut him off. Don't. Her voice was steady cold, nothing like the soft omega tones she usually employed. You made your choice clear. You rejected me in front of everyone because I'm not strong enough for your ambitions. I understand perfectly. Now leave me alone so I can pack. Thorne's jaw tightened. You have to understand my position. I'm being considered for the beta position under Alpha Magnus. I can't have a mate who can't even shift. It would make me look weak to the other candidates. It would undermine my authority before I've even established it. So you chose your career over me. Sarah turned back to her packing, refusing to look at him, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing how deeply his words cut. You chose status and power over what we had together. I hope it was worth it, Thorne. I hope you get everything you wanted. I didn't want to hurt you. His voice held a note of genuine regret that somehow made it worse. If there was any other way, any way to keep you and still advance in the pack, I would have taken it. But there isn't. The pack elders made it clear that a beta with a defective omega mate would never be accepted. I had to choose. And you did. Sarah zipped up her backpack and slung it over her shoulder, finally turning to face him. You chose yourself. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, Thorne Blackwood, about what you value and what you're willing to sacrifice to get it. She moved toward the door, but he blocked her path. Where will you go? What will you do? You can't survive out there alone. The concern in his voice was probably genuine, which made it all the more infuriating. He'd just condemned her to death, and now he wanted to soothe his conscience by pretending to care about her survival. That's no longer your concern. Sarah's silver eyes met his brown ones without flinching. You rejected me. You made it clear I'm nothing to you, just damaged goods holding you back from your precious ambitions. What happens to me now is none of your business. Sarah, please, I'm trying to get out of my way. Something in her tone, something hard and final, made him step aside. Sarah walked past him without another glance, her head held high despite the tears burning behind her eyes. She made it exactly 3 steps down the hallway before her legs started shaking so badly she had to lean against the wall. But she couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. The hour was ticking away, and she had to be gone before the pack's warriors came to enforce her banishment. The walk to the pack border felt surreal, like moving through a dream or a nightmare. Pack members she passed didn't meet her eyes. Some whispered to each other as she went by. Others simply ignored her, already erasing her from their collective memory. At the border, 2 warriors stood guard. They were young males she'd known since they were pups, wolves she'd bandaged after training accidents and brought soup to when they were sick. Neither of them spoke to her. Neither of them showed any recognition beyond the cold professionalism of guards doing their duty. They watched her cross the boundary line with weapons drawn, as if she were a threat rather than a broken young woman with nothing but a backpack and a thin cloak against the coming winter. Sarah stood on the other side of the invisible line that separated pack territory from the unclaimed wilderness beyond, staring back at Silver Pine lands. The territory stretched out behind the guards' familiar pine forests and mountain meadows that she'd explored since childhood. Somewhere in that territory was the cabin where she'd been born, the stream where she'd learned to fish, the meadow where she'd picked wildflowers every summer, the training grounds where she'd watched other wolves shift and run and hunt, while she stood aside unable to join them. All of it was lost to her now. All of it might as well be on another planet. One of the guards shifted impatiently, his hand moving to the weapon at his belt. The message was clear. Move along, you're not welcome here anymore. Sarah turned her back on Silverpine and walked into the forest, heading south toward nothing in particular, toward anywhere that wasn't here. She didn't look back again. The first day wasn't so bad. Sarah had spent enough time in the forest around Silverpine territory to know how to navigate, how to find water, how to identify which plants were edible and which would make her sick. The September weather was still mild during the day, though the nights were getting colder as autumn deepened into the approaching winter. She walked until her feet ached, putting as much distance as possible between herself and her former pack. The physical pain was almost welcome, a distraction from the emotional devastation that threatened to overwhelm her if she stopped moving long enough to think. As sunset approached, Sarah found a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock and made a cold camp. She didn't dare start a fire, didn't want to draw attention from any wolves who might be passing through. She ate a handful of berries she'd gathered while walking and drank from her water bottle that she'd filled at a stream an hour back. Then she wrapped herself in her mother's quilt and tried not to think about the fact that this was her life now. This was all she had: a backpack, a cloak, and the uncertain mercy of the wilderness. The second day was harder. Sarah's supplies, meager to begin with, ran out by mid-morning. The berries and edible plants she could forage weren't enough to satisfy the hunger that gnawed at her belly. Wolves needed meat, needed protein, and she had no way to hunt without the ability to shift. She had no weapons beyond a small knife she'd taken from the Omega Quarter's kitchen. She had no money to buy food, even if she could find civilization. She tried to find another pack to take her in, reasoning that surely someone would show mercy to a lone Omega. Surely not every pack was as cruel as Silverpine had been. She was wrong. The first pack she approached, a small group controlling territory along the Wyoming border, took one look at her and knew immediately what she was: a banished wolf, an Omega without pack protection. Bad luck, their alpha said, a grizzled male with scarred hands and cold eyes. Banished wolves bring nothing but trouble. Get off our land before we decide you're a threat that needs eliminating. When the second pack didn't even give her a chance to explain. Their border patrol found her as she tried to cross into their territory, looking for shelter and food and any scrap of compassion. They chased her back into the unclaimed lands, with teeth snapping at her heels, making it clear that her presence was unwelcome, and her life was forfeit if she tried to enter their territory again. By the third day, Sarah was dying. She'd gotten turned around in the dense pine forest that covered the Montana wilderness, lost her bearings, and couldn't find her way back to any of the streams or rivers she'd marked in her mental map. Her water bottle was empty. Her feet were blistered and bleeding from walking in worn boots that had never been meant for this kind of journey. Her body was weak from 3 days of inadequate food and the stress that was destroying her from the inside out. And worst of all, she could feel her heat cycle beginning. It was too early. It shouldn't have started for another 2 weeks. But the stress of rejection, of banishment, of survival had triggered her body's Omega biology into emergency mode. Heat cycles were meant to ensure Omega reproduction, to flood the body with pheromones and need that would attract alphas and ensure the continuation of the species. For a lone Omega in the wilderness with no pack protection and no mate going into heat was a death sentence. The fever started as the sun began to set on her third day of wandering. Sarah's skin felt too hot, too tight, like she was burning from the inside out. Sweat soaked through her clothes despite the autumn chill. Her scent changed, growing sweeter, more intense, broadcasting her vulnerable state to every predator within miles. She needed an alpha. Her body screamed for it, for the relief that only nodding could provide, for the connection that would ease the biological crisis overwhelming her system. But there was no alpha. There was nothing except trees and rocks and the growing certainty that she was going to die out here alone and unmated and forgotten. When full darkness fell, Sarah knew she couldn't go any further. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. The world kept tilting in ways that suggested she was on the verge of collapse. She stumbled into a small clearing, barely visible in the dim moonlight filtering through the pine canopy, and sank down against a fallen log. The temperature was dropping fast. Sarah could see her breath misting in the air. She pulled her thin cloak tight around her shoulders, but it provided almost no protection against the cold. Her mother's quilt was in her backpack, but she was too weak to even pull it out. This is it, she thought distantly. This is where I die, alone in the forest, rejected and forgotten. No one will even know what happened to me. No one will care. The unfairness of it all crashed over her in waves. She'd never done anything to deserve this. She'd spent her whole life trying to be good, trying to be helpful, trying to earn her place in a pack that saw her as defective. She'd accepted their judgment, internalized their criticism, believed them when they said she was broken. And for what? So she could die at 22 with nothing to show for her existence except a backpack of worthless possessions and the memory of a man who'd discarded her like trash. Sarah closed her eyes, too exhausted even for tears, and waited for the cold or the hunger or the predators to finish what Thorne's rejection had started. That's when she felt it. A presence, massive and powerful, approaching through the darkness with purpose and speed. Then another presence, equally powerful, moving in perfect synchronization with the first. Sarah's eyes snapped open, her heart suddenly racing with a fear that cut through even her exhaustion. Something was coming. No two somethings. She could feel them now, their power radiating like heat, pressing against her senses in a way that made every hair on her body stand on end. Even though she couldn't shift, couldn't access the pack bonds that would normally warn her of approaching wolves, she knew with absolute certainty what was moving through the forest toward her clearing. Alphas. The first wolf emerged from the tree line on Sarah's left, and the sight of it drove every rational thought from her mind. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of a normal wolf, with muscles that rippled beneath a coat of pure white fur that seemed to gleam silver in the moonlight. The creature's eyes were an impossible shade of ice blue that glowed with their own internal light, fixing on Sarah with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just an alpha. This was an alpha of tremendous power, the kind of wolf that legends were built around. Before she could process this, a second wolf appeared on her right, moving with the same predatory grace as the first. This one was identical in size and build to its companion, but its fur was midnight black so dark it seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. The same ice blue eyes blazed against the darkness of its coat, creating an eerie, beautiful contrast that would have been breathtaking if Sarah hadn't been absolutely terrified. Twin alphas. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She'd heard stories about twin-born alphas, legendary pairs that shared power and territory bonds so deep they could communicate without words and move as one entity split between two bodies. But she'd always thought they were myths, fairy tales told to pups to make them dream of impossible things. The two wolves moved in perfect synchronization, circling her slowly, their massive paws silent on the forest floor. Their eyes never left her face, studying her with an intelligence that was distinctly human despite their animal forms. Sarah knew she should be terrified. These were apex predators, creatures of immense power that could tear her apart without effort. She was weak, defenseless in heat, and completely at their mercy. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something other than sit here and wait to be killed. But she couldn't move, and not because of fear. The mate bond slammed into her like lightning, striking so powerful it drove the air from her lungs and sent shockwaves through her entire body. Not one bond, but two each as strong as anything she'd ever felt with Thorn, intertwining around her chest like golden chains that blazed with supernatural heat. No, the word came out as a whisper, barely audible even to her own ears. Not again. Please, not again. She couldn't survive another rejection. The first one had nearly destroyed her. If these wolves felt the bond too and chose to reject her, if they looked at her and saw the same defective Omega that Thorn had seen, it would kill her. She was sure of it. Her heart would simply stop beating, and she would die right here in this clearing, unmated and unwanted. But the wolves weren't moving away. If anything, they were moving closer, their massive bodies tense with what looked almost like anticipation, hunger, need. The white wolf reached her first, lowering its enormous head until its nose was nearly touching her face. Sarah held perfectly still, barely breathing as the creature inhaled deeply, taking in her scent with an intensity that made her shiver. Its eyes widened, pupils dilating, until only a thin ring of ice blue remained. A low rumble emanated from its chest that wasn't quite a growl, but was far too intense to be a purr. The sound vibrated through Sarah's bones, resonating with something deep inside her that she didn't fully understand. The black wolf moved to her other side, mirroring its twin's actions with eerie precision. When it scented her, drawing her omega pheromones deep into its lungs, it made the same rumbling sound, and Sarah felt the mate bonds pulse with approval, with want, with a possessiveness that should have terrified her, but instead made heat pool low in her belly. She was in heat. The realization came crashing back with devastating clarity. These alphas could smell every bit of it, could scent the biological need pouring off her in waves, could probably sense her omega nature calling to their alpha instincts in ways that bypassed all rational thought. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking with exhaustion and fear, and something that felt dangerously like hope. "I didn't mean to intrude on your territory. I'll leave. I'll go right now if you just give me a chance. Please don't hurt me." The white wolf made a sound that was almost like a scoff, a very human expression of disbelief coming from an animal throat. Then right before Sarah's eyes, it began to shift. The transformation was fluid and beautiful, in a way that made Sarah's chest ache with longing. She'd watched other wolves shift thousands of times, had stood on the sidelines during pack runs and training sessions, always hoping that maybe this time her own shift would trigger. It never had. But watching this alpha transform was different than anything she'd ever witnessed. Bones reshaped with liquid grace rather than the painful cracking she'd seen from less powerful wolves. Fur receded like water flowing uphill, revealing skin that seemed to glow in the moonlight. In less than 10 seconds, a man stood before her instead of a wolf. And what a man he was. Tall, easily 6'7", with the body that looked like it had been carved from marble by an artist obsessed with masculine perfection. Broad shoulders tapered to a narrow waist, and hips with muscles defined enough to make Sarah's mouth go dry, despite her fear and exhaustion. His hair was platinum blonde, so pale it was almost white, falling past his shoulders in a thick curtain that caught the moonlight. And his eyes were that same impossible ice blue that seemed to see straight through to her soul. He was also completely naked, which meant Sarah could see every inch of him, including the massive arousal jutting from between his legs that made her eyes widen and heat flood her cheeks despite everything. Hurt you. His voice was deep and smooth, like aged whiskey, with a faint accent she couldn't quite place. Little Omega, why would we hurt our mate? The black wolf shifted, then transforming with the same fluid grace as its twin. The man who emerged was identical to the first in every way, except the color of his hair, which was black as midnight and just as long. He was just as naked, just as aroused, and the sight of both of them standing there looking at her like she was something precious they wanted to devour made Sarah's entire body flush with heat that had nothing to do with her fever. Your mate! She managed to force the words past her tight throat, trying desperately not to stare at their bodies, at the evidence of their desire, at the raw masculine power they radiated. But I was rejected. My old pack said I was defective. I can't even shift. You can't possibly want... The white-haired twin dropped to his knees in front of her, with surprising speed bringing himself to her eye level. His hand came up to cup her face with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his obvious strength, and the touch sent electricity sparking through Sarah's entire body, making the mate bonds flare golden bright in her chest. You are not defective, he said firmly, his ice-blue eyes intense on hers. You are a treasure, a gift. The moon goddess herself brought you to us. His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. The gesture was so tender, so caring, that it made something crack open in Sarah's chest, some wall she'd built to protect herself from further hurt. I'm Cade Winterborn, he continued, his voice softening slightly. AlphaKing of the Northern Territories. This is my twin brother, Riker. And you, little Omega, are our fated mate. Riker moved to kneel on her other side, his hand coming to rest on her lower back in a touch that was both comforting and possessive, grounding and electrifying all at once. His scent washed over her, smoke and dark spice mixing with Cade's pine and winter frost until Sarah felt drunk on the combination. We've been searching for you our entire lives, Riker said, his voice rougher than his brother's, more raw with emotion. We'd almost given up hope of finding our mate. We're 28 years old, little one. Most alphas find their mates by 25. We thought maybe the goddess had forgotten us or decided we didn't deserve that blessing. Then we felt you enter our territory 3 days ago. Cade continued, his hand still cupping her face like she was something infinitely fragile and valuable. Felt the pull of the bond even though it hadn't fully formed yet. We've been tracking you ever since, waiting for the right moment to approach. We didn't want to frighten you by appearing too suddenly. But when we felt your heat beginning... Riker's hand slid up her spine in a slow, deliberate caress that made Sarah shiver. When we scented your distress, your fear, your pain, we couldn't stay away any longer. We had to come to you, had to make sure you were safe. Sarah's mind was reeling, struggling to process what they were saying. Alpha Kings, twin Alpha Kings. And they were claiming she was their fated mate, that the moon goddess had brought her to them, that they'd been searching for her. This has to be a mistake, she said weakly, her voice breaking on the words. I'm nobody. I'm a rejected Omega who can't shift. Why would the moon goddess pair me with kings, with two kings? It doesn't make sense. Because you're exactly what we need, Riker said, his ice-blue eyes blazing with an intensity that made Sarah's breath catch. We don't need another alpha trying to compete with us for dominance. We don't need a beta who'll challenge our authority. We need an Omega, someone soft and gentle and kind. Someone who makes us want to protect and provide and claim. And goddess, do we want to claim you? Cade added, his voice dropping to a near growl that resonated through Sarah's entire body. Your scent is driving us insane, little mate. You're in heat. Your body is calling to ours in ways that bypass every bit of control we possess. It's taking every ounce of willpower we have not to strip you bare and mount you right here in the dirt. The crude words should have shocked her, should have made her pull away in offense or fear, but instead they made heat flood between her legs, made her body arch toward both of them. Without her conscious decision, made a sound escape her throat that was half whimper, half plea. I don't understand what's happening, Sarah admitted, her voice small and confused. Everything feels too intense, too much. My body is on fire and I can barely think straight. That's the mate bond combined with your heat cycle, Riker explained, though his own voice was strained with barely controlled desire. When fated mates meet during an Omega's heat, the bond forms faster and stronger than normal. Your body recognizes us as yours, knows we can give you what you need, knows we're the only ones who can ease this biological crisis. What I need, Sarah echoed, confusion mixing with the haze of heat that was making it difficult to focus on anything except the two perfect alphas kneeling on either side of her. Relief, Kate said bluntly, his eyes never leaving hers. Your heat is going to get worse before it gets better. Without an alpha to help you through it, to knot you and ease the biological need, you'll be in agony for days. Fever, pain, desperate need that can't be satisfied no matter what you do to yourself. It could kill you, little mate. Heat cycles aren't meant to be endured alone. We can help you, Riker added, his hand now tracing patterns on her lower back that made rational thought nearly impossible. We can give you what your body is craving, but only if you want it, little Omega. We'll never force you. Despite our desire, despite how much we want to claim you right here and now, we won't touch you without your explicit permission. The sincerity in their voices, the genuine concern beneath the obvious hunger, made something in Sarah's chest crack wide open. These were Alpha Kings, the most powerful wolves in the Northern Territories, and they were kneeling before her in the dirt, asking permission, treating her like she mattered, like she had value, like she was more than just damaged goods. I'm scared, she whispered, the admission costing her everything. My last mate rejected me in front of my entire pack. He called me defective, cursed, unworthy of standing beside any alpha. What if you decide I'm not good enough either? What if you claim me tonight and regret it tomorrow? I can't survive another rejection. I know I can't. That will never happen. Both twins said, their voices overlapping in perfect harmony. Cade cupped her face with both hands, now forcing her to meet his eyes to see the absolute conviction burning there. Listen to me very carefully, Sarah Ashford. That fool who rejected you was an idiot who couldn't recognize treasure when it was offered to him. A blind man who saw only surface value and missed the precious soul beneath. But his stupidity is our blessing, because it brought you to us. You're ours now, Riker said, his voice carrying the weight of an oath, a promise, a vow that resonated with Alpha authority. The moon goddess chose you for us, and we choose you right back. No rejection, no abandonment, no second thoughts or regrets. Just claiming and keeping and cherishing for the rest of our very long lives. Sarah looked between them at these two impossibly beautiful, impossibly powerful men who were looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer they'd ever made. The mate bonds were singing in her chest, pulsing with rightness, with home, with forever. And her body was on fire, heat coursing through her in waves that were becoming impossible to ignore. She needed something, needed them, with a desperation that was quickly overwhelming every rational thought, every fear, every doubt. Help me, she breathed, making her choice, surrendering to the inevitable. Please, I don't know what to do, but I need. We know what you need, Cade said, his eyes flashing with predatory satisfaction. And we're going to give you everything, little mate. Everything you need, everything you deserve, everything you've been denied by wolves too stupid to see your worth. But first, Riker stood in one fluid motion, reaching down to scoop Sarah up like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his broad chest. We're taking you home. You're not spending another night in the cold when we have a palace waiting for you. Sarah couldn't help but notice his arousal pressed against her hip, hot and hard and impossibly large. She'd never been with anyone before, had been saving herself for her fated mate, and the size of him made nervousness flutter in her stomach alongside the heat. Cade shifted back into his wolf form, the transformation flowing over him like water, and Sarah watched in fascination as Riker managed to climb onto his twin's back while still holding her securely. The white wolf was so large that even carrying both of them, it moved with easy, powerful grace. Hold on tight, Riker murmured against her ear, his breath hot on her skin, making her shiver. And try not to think too hard about what's pressing against you. We're going to take care of you soon, little mate, we promise. We're going to make you feel so good you forget that bastard who rejected you ever existed. The promise in his words, the absolute certainty, sent a shiver through Sarah that had nothing to do with the cold. She wrapped her arms around Riker's neck and held on as the massive white wolf began to run. The world blurred around them as Cade moved through the forest with inhuman speed, covering ground that would have taken Sarah days to walk in what felt like minutes. She caught glimpses of packed territory, of wolves that stopped and bowed as they passed, of buildings and lights in the distance that suggested a settlement far larger than Silverpine had ever been. And then they were approaching a massive structure that could only be described as a palace built from white stone that seemed to glow in the moonlight, with towers and spires that reached toward the star-filled sky. It was the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever seen, like something out of the fairy tales her mother had told her as a child. Guards at the gate bowed deeply as they approached, their eyes widening when they saw Sarah in Riker's arms, but wisely saying nothing. Cade shifted back to human form, Once they were through the gates, and Sarah found herself suddenly surrounded by two naked, aroused Alpha Kings in the middle of a palace courtyard. "Get her inside," Riker said to his twin, his voice rough with barely controlled need. "I can smell her heat from here. She's about to hit the peak. We don't have much time before the pain starts." Cade didn't need to be told twice. He strode through the palace doors, ignoring the shocked looks from servants and guards, and carried Sarah up a grand staircase that seemed to go on forever. Finally, he kicked open a door to reveal the most opulent bedroom Sarah had ever seen. A massive bed dominated the space, easily large enough for 3 or 4 people, with silk sheets in deep blue and what looked like thousands of pillows. The room smelled like pine and frost and something uniquely masculine that made Sarah's Omega nature purr with satisfaction. "Home," her instincts whispered. "Safe. Ours." Cade laid her gently on the bed and stepped back, his eyes raking over her with undisguised hunger. Sarah could see his control fraying, could see the alpha nature warring with his obvious desire to be gentle with her. Riker appeared in the doorway, having apparently stopped to put on pants, though they did little to hide the massive erection straining against the fabric. He closed the door behind him and moved to the other side of the bed, his ice blue eyes just as hungry as his twins. "We need to talk before this goes any further," Cade said seriously, though his voice was strained with the effort of maintaining control. "We need to make sure you understand exactly what you're agreeing to, Sarah." She struggled to focus through the haze of heat that was making it difficult to think about anything except the overwhelming need building between her legs. Her skin felt too hot, too tight. There was an ache inside her that was becoming painful, an emptiness that desperately needed to be filled. "If we claim you tonight," Cade continued, his eyes never leaving hers, "there's no going back. The mate bond will be permanent, unbreakable. You'll be ours forever and we'll be yours. You'll be our Luna Queen, our mate, our responsibility, and our treasure for the rest of our lives. And you'll be ours," Riker added, his voice dark with possession. "Only ours. We don't share with anyone except each other. Any wolf who looks at you wrong will answer to us. Any threat to you becomes a threat to the entire kingdom. We're possessive, Sarah, probably more than is healthy. We've waited our entire lives for our mate, and now that we've found you, we're never letting you go." "Is that what you want, little Omega?" Cade asked softly. "To be ours forever. To let us claim you, mark you, bind you to us in ways that can never be undone." Sarah looked between them at these two powerful, beautiful men who wanted her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but instead felt like coming home. She could feel the mate bonds humming in her chest, warm and golden and right. Could feel her body responding to their presence, their sense, their obvious desire. She'd been rejected, cast out, left to die. Had believed she was worthless, defective, undeserving of love or loyalty, or even basic kindness. But these Alpha Kings looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was exactly what they'd been searching for their entire lives. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I want to be yours, both of yours, forever." The twins exchanged a look, some wordless communication passing between them that spoke of the deep bond they shared. Then they moved in perfect synchronization, Cade kneeling on the bed in front of her, while Riker moved to her side. "May I remove your clothes?" Cade asked, his hands going to the hem of her worn shirt, but not moving further without permission. Sarah nodded, unable to form words, and watched as Cade slowly pulled the fabric up and over her head. She wasn't wearing anything underneath, had lost her undergarments days ago, and suddenly she was bare from the waist up, exposed to their burning gazes. "Beautiful." Cade breathed, his hands coming up to cup her breasts with reverent gentleness, his thumbs brushing over her nipples in a way that made her gasp. "So perfect. So ours." Riker moved to remove her pants, sliding them down her legs along with her ruined boots and socks. When she was completely naked before them both, twins simply stared, their eyes roaming over every inch of her body with an appreciation that made Sarah feel beautiful despite her exhaustion and disheveled state. "Our mate," Riker said, his voice filled with wonder and hunger in equal measure. "Our perfect, beautiful mate. We're going to worship every inch of you, little one. We're going to learn every sound you make, every place that makes you shiver, every touch that makes you beg." But first, Cade set his hand sliding down her stomach to the wetness between her legs, making Sarah cry out at the contact. "We need to take care of this heat. You're burning up, sweetheart. You need relief, and we're going to give it to you." His fingers found her entrance, circling but not entering yet, and Sarah couldn't stop the whimper that escaped her throat. She was soaked, more aroused than she'd ever been in her life, and the simple touch of his hand against her sensitive flesh was almost enough to make her come apart. So wet, Riker groaned, watching his brother's hand move between her legs. So ready for us. Have you ever been touched like this before, little Omega? No, Sarah admitted, her voice breaking on the word. I'm a virgin. I was saving myself for my fated mate. For you. Both twins froze, their eyes widening with something that looked like possessive satisfaction mixed with tender protectiveness. A virgin, Cade repeated, his voice dark with pleasure. You saved yourself for us. Goddess Sarah, you're perfect. Absolutely perfect. We're going to make your first time everything it should be. Riker promised, his hand joining his brother's between her legs, both of them touching her now in ways that made rational thought impossible. We're going to be so careful with you, so gentle. We're going to make you feel so good, little mate. Going to make you scream our names until everyone in this palace knows who you belong to. Sarah was squirming now, trying to push herself onto their fingers, desperate for more contact, more pressure, more anything to ease the ache that was consuming her from the inside out. The heat had reached a peak that bordered on painful, her entire body screaming for relief that only these alphas could provide. Please, she whimpered, beyond embarrassment, now beyond any thought except the overwhelming need. I need, please, I need. What do you need? Cade asked, his mouth descending to her breast, his tongue flicking over her nipple in a way that made electricity shoot straight to her core. Tell us, Omega. Use your words. I need you inside me, Sarah gasped out, her hands clutching at the silk sheets beneath her. Both of you. I need to be filled, need to be claimed. Please, please, please. The twins exchanged another look, and Riker's fingers withdrew from between her legs, making Sarah whimper at the loss. But then Cade was positioning himself between her thighs, his massive body covering hers, and she could feel the hard length of him pressing against her entrance. This might hurt at first, little mate, Cade murmured, his ice blue eyes locked on hers, one hand cupping her face with infinite tenderness. You're a virgin, and we're not small. But I promise the pain will fade quickly, and then there will be only pleasure. Do you trust me? Sarah nodded, unable to form words, her entire being focused on the feel of him pressing against her, so close to giving her what she desperately needed. I need to hear you say it, Cade insisted, his control clearly hanging by a thread. I need your consent, Sarah. Explicit and clear. Yes, she managed, her voice ragged with need. Yes, Cade, please. Claim me, make me yours. He pushed forward slowly, carefully, letting her body adjust to his size inch by devastating inch. The burn was intense, the stretch almost too much, and tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as her virgin body struggled to accommodate him. Riker moved to kneel beside her head, his hand stroking her hair with soothing gentleness, even as his other hand guided himself to her lips. Open your mouth, sweetheart. I'm going to teach you how to pleasure an alpha while my brother claims you. It'll distract you from the pain, help you focus on something else. Sarah obediently parted her lips, and Riker guided himself into her mouth, just the head at first, letting her get used to the taste and feel of him. He was thick and hard, and the intimacy of the act made her feel claimed in a way that went beyond the physical. That's it. Riker groaned, his hand gentle in her hair. Use your tongue. Get me nice and wet. You're doing so well, little mate, so perfect for us. The praise sent warmth flooding through Sarah that had nothing to do with her heat. While she focused on learning how to take Riker into her mouth, Cade continued pushing forward between her legs, slow and patient and careful, until finally he was fully seated inside her, so deep she could feel him everywhere. The pain was fading now, replaced by a sense of fullness that was overwhelming and perfect, and exactly what her body had been craving. Cade still giving her time to adjust, his forehead pressed against hers as he struggled for control. How does she feel? Riker asked his twin, his voice strained as Sarah's tongue explored the length of him. Perfect, Cade groaned. Tight and wet and absolutely perfect. She was made for us, brother. Made to take us. Then claim her, Riker said, his ice blue eyes blazing with hunger. Make her ours. Cade began to move, withdrawing slowly before pushing back and setting a rhythm that was gentle at first, but gradually building in intensity. Each thrust hit something deep inside Sarah that made stars explode behind her eyes, pleasure so intense it bordered on overwhelming. She moaned around Riker's length, the vibrations making him groan and tighten his hand in her hair. The twins worked in tandem, one pushing in as the other pulled back, keeping her constantly filled, constantly pleasured, constantly aware of exactly who was claiming her. That's our girl, Cade murmured, his thrusts becoming harder, now faster, driven by instinct and need, and the mate bond that was blazing golden bright in all their chests. Taking this so well, being so good for your alphas. Sarah's second orgasm built faster than the first, the combination of Cade hitting that perfect spot inside her with every thrust and Riker's encouraging words and gentle touches pushing her higher and higher. When Cade's hand slid between their bodies to circle that sensitive bundle of nerves at the apex of her thighs, Sarah's entire world shattered. The orgasm that tore through her was more intense than anything she'd ever experienced. Pleasure so overwhelming it whited out her vision, her body convulsing her inner walls, clenching around Cade with rhythmic pulses that seemed to go on forever. She screamed around Riker's length, unable to contain the sound, and both twins groaned at the sensation, at the evidence of her pleasure, at the knowledge that they'd brought her to this peak. "That's it, little mate," Riker encouraged, his own control clearly hanging by a thread. "Come for us. Let us feel how good we make you feel." Cade's thrusts became erratic, chasing his own release, now driven by the feel of her clenching around him, and the mate bond urging him to claim to Mark, to make her permanently his. He drove deep one final time and held there, and Sarah felt the hot rush of his release, filling her, marking her from the inside. At the same moment, his teeth sank into the left side of her neck, right where it met her shoulder, the claiming bite that would mark her as his mate for all to see. The pain was sharp and bright, but it was quickly overwhelmed by pleasure as the mate bond on Cade's side sealed with a flash of golden light that she could feel rather than see. Riker followed a moment later, and Sarah struggled to swallow as he filled her mouth, his hand gentle but firm on the back of her head, keeping her in place until he was finished. When he finally pulled back, he looked down at her with such tenderness and satisfaction that it made her chest ache. "Perfect," he murmured, wiping a trace of moisture from the corner of her mouth with his thumb. "You're absolutely perfect, Sarah." Cade withdrew carefully, and Sarah whimpered at the emptiness, at the loss of that feeling of fullness and connection. But then Riker was there, strong hands gripping her hips, and she realized he intended to claim her too right now, while she was still trembling from the aftershocks of her last orgasm. "My turn," Riker said, his voice rough with need and possessiveness. "And this time you're going to ride me, little mate. You're going to take control, set the pace, take what you need from me." He lay back on the bed, his massive body stretched out and offering his arousal standing proud and thick, and already glistening at the tip, despite having just found release in her mouth. Cade helped position Sarah over his twin, supporting her trembling legs as she straddled Riker's hips. "Sink down onto him," Cade instructed, his hand steadying her. "Take him at your own pace. You control this, sweetheart." Sarah positioned herself and began to lower her body, taking Riker inside her inch by inch. He felt different than Cade, the angle different, the stretch just as intense, but hitting different places inside her that made her gasp and moan. "That's it," Riker groaned, his hands gripping her hips, but not forcing her, letting her control the pace. "Take what you need, Omega. Ride me. Use me for your pleasure." When she was fully seated on him, Sarah paused, adjusting to the sensation of being filled again so soon after Cade. Her body was already sensitive, already overwhelmed, but the heat demanded completion of the claiming, demanded both Alphas' marks. She began to move, rocking her hips in an instinctive rhythm that had both of them groaning. It was awkward, at first uncertain, but Riker's hands guided her, showing her how to angle her body to hit that perfect spot inside that made her see stars. "You're so beautiful like this," Cade murmured, from behind her, his hands sliding up her sides to cup her breasts, his mouth finding the unmarked right side of her neck. "Taking your pleasure from us. Learning how to make yourself feel good. Our perfect little Omega." Riker thrust up to meet her movements, and the combination of Cade's hands on her breasts and Riker's length hitting deep inside her with every rock of her hips pushed Sarah toward another peak faster than should have been possible. "I can't," she gasped, her movements becoming erratic. "It's too much, I can't." "You can," Riker insisted, his ice blue eyes locked on hers with burning intensity. "Come for me, Sarah. Come on my knot, and let me claim you as mine." His knot was beginning to swell. She could feel it stretching her even wider, locking them together in the way that was unique to Alpha-Omega pairings. The sensation was overwhelming, bordering on too much, but then Cade's fingers found that sensitive bundle of nerves between her legs, and Sarah shattered again. This orgasm was different, deeper, more intense because of the knot triggering her Omega biology in ways that nothing else could. She screamed Riker's name, her entire body convulsing, her inner walls clenching around him and his knot in rhythmic pulses that seemed to milk his own release from him. Riker drove up one final time and held there, his knot fully swollen, now locking them together as his release flooded into her. And like his twin before him, his teeth found the right side of her neck, the claiming bite perfectly mirroring Cade's on the left. The second mate bond sealed with another flash of golden light, and Sarah could feel it. Now could feel both bonds humming in her chest, connecting her to both twins in ways that went beyond the physical. She could sense their emotions, their satisfaction, their possessive love, their overwhelming protectiveness. She collapsed forward onto Riker's chest, completely spent, trembling with exhaustion and satisfaction and emotional overwhelm. Both alphas immediately moved to comfort her, their hands gentle, as they stroked her hair and back, murmuring praise and reassurance. "You did so well, little mate," Cade said softly. "So perfect for us. So brave." "Rest now," Riker added, his arms wrapping around her protectively. "We've got you. You're safe. You're ours, and we're never letting you go." Sarah wanted to respond, wanted to tell them how she felt, how this had been, everything she'd never dared to dream of, how they'd made her feel cherished and wanted and precious. But exhaustion was pulling her under her body, demanding rest after the intensity of what had just happened. She drifted off to sleep, still locked on Riker's knot, still held between both twins, their scents surrounding her like the most comfortable blanket in the world. When Sarah woke, sunlight was streaming through massive windows, and she was lying between both alphas, no longer knotted, but still intimately close. Her body ached in unfamiliar ways, a pleasant soreness that reminded her of everything that had happened the night before. For a moment, panic seized her. Had it been real? Or had she dreamed the entire thing, conjured it up in her dying moments in the forest as her mind tried to give her comfort before the end? But then Cade's arm tightened around her waist, and Riker's hand splayed possessively over her stomach, and she knew it was real. The mate bonds humming in her chest confirmed it, two golden threads connecting her to each twin, warm and solid and permanent. She turned her head carefully, not wanting to wake them, and studied Cade's face in the morning light. He looked younger in sleep, less intimidating, almost vulnerable. His platinum blonde hair was tangled from last night's activities, falling across his face in a way that made him look boyish despite his obvious masculinity. A sound from across the room made Sarah's head snap around. An elderly woman was sitting in a chair near the window, watching them with knowing eyes that were the same ice blue as the twins. She was dressed in fine clothing, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and despite her age, there was a strength to her that spoke of power and authority. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, trying not to disturb the sleeping alphas. The woman smiled. "I'm Morrigan, the pack historian and keeper of the old knowledge. And you, my dear, are the answer to many prayers." She stood and moved closer to the bed, her movements graceful despite her apparent age. "I felt the mate bonds form last night. The entire palace did. The surge of power was extraordinary, unlike anything we've experienced in generations." Sarah pulled the silk sheet higher suddenly, very aware of her nakedness and the evidence of what had transpired between her and the twins. "I don't understand. What do you mean, surge of power?" "When twin alphas find their fated mate," Morgan explained, settling into a chair beside the bed, "the resulting bond is 3 times as powerful as a normal mating. You three together are stronger than you would be apart. Your combined power will reshape this territory in ways we can't even imagine yet." "But I'm defective," Sarah protested, the old pain rising up despite everything. "I can't shift. I can't access the most basic wolf abilities. How can I contribute any power to a bond when I have none myself?" Morgan's eyes softened with something that looked like compassion mixed with excitement. "Your inability to shift isn't a weakness, child. It's because your power manifests differently than other wolves. I've been studying the old texts, the ancient records that most packs have forgotten or dismissed as mythology, and I believe I know what you are." "What am I?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lunar blessed," Morgan said simply. "Your power doesn't come from shifting forms. It comes from the moon herself. You can't shift because you're meant to channel lunar energy directly to heal and protect and strengthen in your pack in ways a normal Omega never could." The words hung in the air between them, too impossible to believe, but too sincere to dismiss outright. Sarah had spent her entire life being told she was broken, defective, cursed. The idea that she might actually be something special, something blessed, was almost too much to process. "I don't know how to do any of that," she finally said. "I don't know how to channel lunar energy or heal anyone or do anything you're describing." "You will learn," Morgan assured her. "But first you need to eat and recover your strength. Your mates thoroughly exhausted you last night, and you'll need energy for what comes next." "On what comes next?" Sarah asked, though part of her was afraid of the answer. "The pack will want to meet their new Luna Queen," Morgan said, standing and moving toward the door. "They'll want to see the Omega who captured their kings' hearts, but that can wait a few hours. Rest, eat, let your mates worship you a bit more." She winked a surprisingly playful gesture from the elderly historian. They've waited 28 years for this. They're not going to let you out of bed easily. She left, closing the door softly behind her, and Sarah was alone again with her sleeping mates. Except they weren't sleeping anymore. Cade's ice blue eyes were open and watching her with an intensity that made her shiver. "How much of that did you hear?" she asked. "All of it," Riker said from her other side, his own eyes opening. "And the historian is right about everything. You don't need to be anything other than what you are." "But I don't even know what I am," Sarah protested, the old insecurities rising up despite the comfort of their presence. "If I'm this lunar-blessed thing, why didn't anyone in my old pack know? Why did they all think I was defective?" "Because they were fools," Cade said bluntly, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "And because lunar-blessed wolves are so rare that most packs have forgotten they even exist. The last one was born over 100 years ago. Your old pack saw you couldn't shift and decided you were worthless, without looking deeper, without considering that your power might manifest differently. Their stupidity brought you to us," Riker added, his hand sliding up from her stomach to cup her breasts in a possessive touch that made heat pool low in her belly despite her exhaustion. "And for that, we should probably thank them, though I'd rather rip out Thorn Blackwood's throat for making you suffer." "You both knew what I might be before last night, didn't you?" Sarah asked, looking between them. "We suspected," Kate admitted. "The way you moved, the way you carried yourself, the unusual color of your eyes, they're not normal Omega Gray. They're silver touched by the moon. We hoped you might be lunar blessed, but we didn't know for certain until the mating bond formed and we felt your true power." "And you're not disappointed that I can't shift," Sarah asked, needing to hear it again, needing the reassurance that they truly accepted her as she was. "Disappointed," Riker laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Little mate, you're perfect exactly as you are. We don't need you to shift. We need you to be our anchor, our heart, our connection to the divine. We need you to love us and let us love you in return. Everything else can be learned," Cade said simply, his hand cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "Magic, politics, pack leadership, all of that is secondary to the most important thing." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "That you're ours," Cade said. "For the rest of our lives," Riker added, completing his twin's thought. The sincerity in their voices, the absolute conviction, made Sarah's chest tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. She'd gone from rejected and dying to claimed and cherished in less than 24 hours. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "I love you," she whispered, the words surprising her even as they left her lips. "I know it's too soon, that we've only known each other for one night, but the mate bond makes me feel things I never expected. Makes me certain of things my rational mind says are impossible." "That's exactly how we feel too," Riker assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We've known you less than 12 hours, but we'd die to protect you. We'd burn down kingdoms for you. We'd give you anything in our power to give." "Starting with breakfast," Cade said with a grin, sitting up and stretching in a way that made the muscles in his back and shoulders ripple. "You must be starving. We definitely worked up an appetite last night." Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks at the reminder of exactly what they'd done, how thoroughly they'd claimed her, how many times they'd brought her to climax. Both twins chuckled at her reaction, clearly amused by her lingering shyness. "Still so modest?" Riker teased, his hand sliding down to cup her between her legs, finding her already slick, despite her embarrassment. "Even after we've tasted every inch of you, claimed you in every way possible, you still blush so prettily." His fingers circled her entrance, and Sarah gasped as arousal flooded through her, despite the soreness from last night. Her Omega biology was already responding to her Alpha's proximity, already craving more despite how thoroughly they'd satisfied her. "Careful, brother," Cade warned, though his own hand was sliding up to cup her breast, his thumb circling her nipple. "Our little mate is sore from last night. We should let her recover before we ravish her again." Should," Riker agreed, but his fingers were already pushing inside her, curling to find that spot that made her back arch off the bed. "But I don't think I can keep my hands off her." Cade's mouth descended to her other breast, sucking the nipple into his mouth in a way that made Sarah whimper and squirm. Between Riker's fingers inside her and Cade's mouth on her breast, she was quickly losing the ability to think about anything except the pleasure building in her core. "Please," she whimpered, not even sure what she was asking for. "We know what you need," Riker said, his voice dark with promise. "And we're going to give it to you. But first, we're taking you to the bath. We're going to clean you up, tend to your sore muscles, and then we're going to make love to you properly. Slowly, taking our time to worship every inch of you." Cade stood scooping Sarah up before she could protest and carried her toward an adjoining room that turned out to be a bathroom larger than her entire former living space in Silverpine. The bath was more like a small pool already filled with steaming water that smelled of herbs and healing oils. Riker followed them in, and both twins climbed into the water, with her positioning themselves on either side. True to Riker's word, they didn't rush. They washed her hair with gentle fingers, massaged her sore shoulders and thighs, with skilled hands kissed every mark they'd left on her skin with reverent tenderness. "You're so beautiful," Kate murmured, his hands cupping her breasts, his thumbs circling her nipples in slow, deliberate movements that made her breath catch. "So perfect for us in every way." Riker's hand slid between her legs, his fingers parting her folds and finding that sensitive bundle of nerves. Even sore, even exhausted, Sarah's body responded to their touch, like it was made for exactly this, like she'd been created to fit between these two perfect alphas and receive their worship. "That's it," Riker encouraged as she began to rock against his hand, chasing the pleasure his fingers were building. "Let us make you feel good, little mate. Let us take care of you the way you deserve." Cade's mouth found hers, kissing her deeply while his hands continued to work her breasts. Riker's fingers slipped inside her curling to find that perfect spot, while his thumbs circled her pearl with maddening precision. The orgasm built slowly this time, a rolling wave rather than a lightning strike. And when it crested, Sarah came with a soft cry, her body arching between them, as pleasure washed through her in gentle pulses rather than the overwhelming intensity of last night. They held her through the aftershocks, murmuring praise and encouragement, their hands gentling to soothing touches rather than arousing ones. When her breathing finally steadied, Kate pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Better," he asked. "Much," Sarah admitted, her body feeling loose and relaxed despite the lingering soreness. "But now I really do need to eat something, and probably get dressed. Morgan said the pack would want to meet me." The reminder of what awaited her outside this bathroom, outside this sanctuary of silk and steam, and perfect alphas, sent anxiety spiking through Sarah. Both twins felt it through the bond, their hands immediately moving to comfort her. "Hey," Riker said firmly, turning her face toward him. "Look at me. You can do this. You're stronger than you know, and you won't be alone. We'll be right beside you every step of the way. And if anyone dares to disrespect you," Kate added with a dangerous edge to his voice, "they'll answer to us personally. You're our Luna Queen, our fated mate blessed by the moon goddess herself. Anyone who treats you as less than the treasure you are will regret it." The fierce protectiveness in their voices made warmth bloom in Sarah's chest. She might not feel ready for this, might not feel worthy of being their queen, but she had them. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. They helped her from the bath, dried her with soft towels, and led her back to the bedroom where an array of clothing had been laid out while they were bathing. Dresses in every color and style, all clearly expensive, and all far finer than anything Sarah had ever worn. "Pick whichever one calls to you," Kate said. "Though personally, I think the silver would complement your eyes beautifully." Sarah moved to the silver dress he'd indicated and had to admit it was stunning. The fabric was soft as silk, the cut both modest and flattering. And when she slipped it on with Riker's help, lacing the back, it fit perfectly, hugging her curves in ways that made her feel beautiful rather than exposed. Kate helped her into soft slippers while Riker brushed her hair until it fell in soft waves down her back, the honey brown catching the morning light. "Perfect," both twins said together, looking at her with such heat in their eyes that Sarah knew if they had more time the dress would be coming right back off. But there was a knock on the door and a servant's voice called that breakfast was ready and the pack was beginning to gather in the grand hall. "Ready?" Kate asked, offering his arm. "No," Sarah admitted, "but I'll do it anyway." Riker took her other arm, and together the three of them walked out of the bedroom and down the grand staircase toward whatever came next. The dining room was smaller than Sarah had expected, intimate rather than grand, with a table set for three and covered dishes that smelled absolutely divine. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. "Eat," Kate said, pulling out a chair for her. "The pack can wait another hour. You need to regain your strength." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She ate everything they put in front of her: eggs, bacon, fresh bread, with butter and jam fruit that tasted like summer coffee that was rich and dark and perfect. The twins watched her with obvious satisfaction, occasionally feeding her bites from their own plates, touching her constantly, like they couldn't bear not to be in contact with her. When she finally pushed back from the table pleasantly full for the first time in days, Sarah felt almost ready to face what came next. Almost. "They're going to hate me," she said quietly, a defective Omega who can't shift, who was rejected and banished by her own pack. Why would they accept me as their Luna Queen? Because we chose you, Riker said simply, and what the Alpha Kings choose, the pack accepts. But more than that, Kate added, taking her hand, they're going to see what we see. Your strength, your kindness, your courage. You survived 3 days alone in the wilderness when you should have died. You maintained your dignity when that bastard humiliated you in front of your entire pack. You're already a Queen, Sarah. You just don't know it yet. His words settled something inside her, some frantic worry that had been clawing at her chest. She took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, I'm ready. The walk to the grand hall felt both too long and too short. Sarah could hear the murmur of voices even before they reached the massive double doors, hundreds of pack members gathering to meet the Omega who'd captured their king's hearts. Kate and Riker flanked her, their presence solid and reassuring, and when the doors opened, Sarah lifted her chin and walked forward with all the grace she could muster. The grand hall was enormous, easily 3 times the size of Silverpine's ceremonial hall. 600 wolves turned as one to watch them enter, conversations dying mid-word as every eye fixed on Sarah. She could feel their assessment, their curiosity, their skepticism. She was small, barely over 5 feet tall, dwarfed by the twins on either side of her. She wore a beautiful dress, but her hair was still damp from the bath. She had no crown, no symbols of authority, nothing but 2 claiming bites on her neck that proclaimed her the twins' mate. Kate and Riker led her to a raised platform at the front of the hall where 3 chairs sat, 2 thrones and 1 smaller chair between them. They helped her up the steps, their hands steady on her arms, and positioned her between their seats before turning to address their pack. Wolves of the Northern Territories, Kate's voice rang out, carrying through the hall with alpha command. We present to you our fated mate, Sarah Ashford, your new Luna Queen. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could feel hundreds of eyes on her, assessing, judging, finding her lacking. She was nobody, nothing, a rejected Omega from a pack most of them had probably never heard of. Then Morgan stood from her seat in the front row. The elderly historian moved with dignity to stand before the platform, her ice-blue eyes meeting Sarah's with knowing warmth. The ancient texts speak of the moon-blessed. Morgan said, her voice clear despite her age. Wolves born once in a generation who cannot shift because their power comes directly from the moon goddess herself. They are marked by silver eyes and blessed with abilities beyond normal wolf magic. The last moon blessed was born over 100 years ago. She turned to face the assembled pack. Look at your new Luna Queen. Truly look. Silver eyes, unable to shift, found by your Alpha Kings in the forest during a full moon. The signs are all there for those with eyes to see. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some excited, some skeptical. Sarah felt her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. I know what some of you are thinking, Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. She hadn't planned to speak, but the words came anyway. You're wondering why your Alpha Kings chose a nobody Omega who can't even shift. You're wondering if I'm worthy of standing beside them. She took a deep breath. I'm wondering the same thing. I don't know what I am yet. I don't know if I'm truly moon-blessed or just defective like my old pack said. But I do know this, I will prove my worth. Not because I have to earn your acceptance. I'm your Luna Queen, whether you like it or not, because your kings chose me, and that's final. A few surprised laughs rippled through the crowd at her bluntness. I'll prove my worth because I choose to. Because I want to be the Luna Queen you deserve. Because I want to protect and serve this pack the way I wasn't able to protect and serve my old one. Her voice softened. I'm not perfect. I'm not powerful, not yet. But I'm brave enough to stand here and admit that, and I'm brave enough to promise you that I will learn. I will grow, and I will be worthy of the honor you're giving me today. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then someone in the back started clapping. Then someone else. And then the entire hall erupted in applause, wolves howling their approval, the sound deafening and overwhelming and beautiful. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but these were good tears, happy tears. Kate and Riker's hands found hers, squeezing gently, their pride and love washing over her through the mate bonds. When the applause finally died down, Riker stepped forward. The Luna Queen has spoken well. There will be a formal presentation ceremony in 3 days' time once she's had time to settle in and begin her training with Morgan. Until then, treat her with the respect due to your queen. Dismissed. The pack began to file out, many of them bowing to Sarah as they passed, their expressions ranging from curious to welcoming to cautiously optimistic. A few looked openly skeptical, but none dared challenge their Alpha King's choice out loud. When the hall was finally empty except for the 3 of them, and Morgan, Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. You did beautifully, Kate said, pulling her into his arms. Perfectly, Riker agreed, wrapping around her from behind so she was sandwiched between them. That was terrifying, Sarah admitted. But you did it anyway, Morgan said, approaching the platform. That's what courage is, child. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She smiled. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have ancient texts to dig through. We start training tomorrow at dawn. Don't be late. She left and Sarah turned in her mate's arms. I can't believe I just did that. We can, both twins said together. Because you're exactly who we knew you were, Kate added. Strong, brave, perfect. Our Luna Queen, Riker finished. Our mate, our forever. And as they stood there in the empty Grand Hall, Sarah finally let herself believe it. She wasn't the broken Omega Silverpine had rejected. She was Sarah Winterborn, Luna Queen of the Northern Territories, fated mate to twin Alpha Kings and possibly, just possibly blessed by the Moon Goddess herself. She was home, and this was only the beginning.